were problems from the start.
Yo, you guys won't believe what I just read before class. Some dude on Reddit said his brother died in a house fire, straight up trapped inside. Now that's a house fire. Imagine being sealed inside a spacecraft. No exit, no way out, where one spark turns the whole thing into flames.
Did you read it? Did you get a lot of this?
Those voices weren't calm commands, they were pure panic, like people banging to escape a locked room, filling up with fire. I can't unhear that.
Going to space was always a risk. But in the beginning of the Apollo program, the United States got a stark realization of just how dangerous its moon missions would be.
These weren't just pilots locked in a tin can. They were fathers, sons, husbands, not just still at risk, but flesh and family. Every Apollo launch felt like strapping human lives to a bomb and hoping the math was flawless. One wrong calculation, one hidden flaw, and the entire mission could vanish in fire.
In the mid-1960s, NASA was working at breakneck speed, attempting to take another step towards President John F. Kennedy's goal to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Apollo program engineers were still focused on fulfilling the foundation for the project's objectives, establishing the technology to meet other national interests in space, achieving preeminence in space for the US, carrying out a program of scientific exploration of the moon, and developing man's capability to work in the lunar environment.
Every second shaved off testing was a crack in the armor. And cracks in rockets don't just end machines, they end lives instantly.
By 1966, NASA upgraded its first multi-stage rocket, the Saturn I, to the more powerful Saturn IB. The top part of the rocket was where several major systems lived, including the Apollo spacecraft, known as the Command Service Module, or CSM. The command module was considered the mothership, with the goal of carrying the astronauts to space and then returning them safely to Earth.
Man, they called it a mothership, but inside, wires hanging everywhere, no space to move, heat choking you out. Dog, that's straight up unsafe. Maybe they weren't upgrading for style points. Saturn I just couldn't cut it. NASA probably needed a stronger ride, cause the moon wasn't some short hop. It was war level stakes.
Inside were 3 compartments, including the sealed crew cabin, which only had about 6 cubic meters of space. With all the operational displays, crew couches, and equipment, there was very little room left over for the astronauts to maneuver.
That crew cabin wasn't a room, it was a coffin-sized box, stuffed with switches and wires. 3 men had to breathe inside of it. There was barely enough space for air itself.
NASA set the launch date for February 21st, 1967. NASA selected 2 veterans and 1 rookie as the crew for the mission that was later dubbed Apollo 1. The command pilot, Gus Grissom, was no stranger to the stress of spaceflight. Grissom was one of the original Mercury pilots, and during the splashdown of his first mission, the capsule's hatch blew open, causing him to nearly drown.
Mercury pilot? Man, I thought he went to the planet. NASA just names their programs after gods. Mercury, Apollo, Gemini? It's so random. Any regular man would have been done with space after choking on ocean water. But Grissom treated it like it was just another day.
The senior pilot was Ed White, who was the first American to conduct a spacewalk during Project Gemini.
This is the greatest experience. It's just tremendous.
And the pilot was Roger Chaffee, who at 31 would be the youngest American ever to go to space. He was added to the crew as a replacement after the original pilot dislocated his shoulder during training.
Training was brutal back then. They'd cram astronauts in pressurized suits, toss them into water drills, and push their bodies to the limit. Don Elsie's shoulder giving out wasn't a fluke. It was proof how hard NASA was pushing them even before launch.
Chaffee was known as a notoriously nice guy who was often teased by other astronauts for his admiration of Grissom and White. He saw the Apollo 1 mission as a way to prove himself worthy of the title of astronaut. Early on in their training, Grissom and the rest of the crew voiced concerns with the spacecraft. primarily with the amount of flammable material in the cabin.
Chaffee wasn't just chasing a mission, he was chasing respect. That hunger to prove himself blinded him from realizing how dangerous the capsule really was. NASA knew the cabin was stuffed with flammable junk, but deadlines shouted louder than safety. To them, missing the moon mattered more than missing men.
The astronauts jokingly presented this crew portrait to the Apollo spacecraft program office manager after he gave the spacecraft a passing grade. But the thing is, the astronauts weren't alone in their concerns. In fact, some experts believed the immense pressure of Kennedy's deadline forced NASA and the contractor, North American Aviation, to make decisions that sacrificed safety.
Yo, I heard back then it was all Cold War vibes. America trying to flex on Russia to be the first on the moon. Whole reputation on the line, so instead of slowing down, they sped up to cut corners. Like lives were just a part of the gamble.
One of the main concerns was NASA's decision to opt for a single gas environment inside the capsule over a dual gas environment because it required a lighter system. This meant that the Apollo spacecraft would use 100% oxygen in the crew cabin, so even a small spark could quickly turn into a blaze.
Hold up, isn't pure oxygen supposed to be like a good thing? More oxygen, easier to breathe, right? Not quite, Michael. Breathing's fine. But pure oxygen makes everything insanely flammable. One tiny spark and the whole cabin becomes a fireball.
Adding to that fear, other astronauts reported seeing what appeared to be frayed wires and short circuits in the cabin of the spacecraft. There were also issues with the decision to have the hatch open inward, and the fact that it didn't carry explosive bolts in the case of an emergency. NASA and North American Aviation made as many adjustments as possible, but in the interest of time, they decided to move forward with the February flight.
Wait a second, if the hatch opened inward, that means the second the cabin got pressurized, it was instantly glued shut. That's like trying to pull a door against a vacuum. Whoa, dude. They never stood a chance.
1 month before launch, the rocket and spacecraft were cleared for what was referred to as a plugs out test. At 1 p.m. on January 27th, the Apollo 1 astronauts entered the command module, sealed the hatch, and prepared for what was considered a sort of dress rehearsal for the actual flight. There were problems from the start.
So this wasn't even a launch? It was just a test run? Yeah, Mikey, that's like slamming a car into gear before checking if the brakes even work. You already begging for a wreck.
Alright, so something else has just come up. I'm trying to get an answer on it now.
First, there was a foul odor emanating from the oxygen tank. And then there was an alarm triggered, indicating a high oxygen flow.
That smell meant wires cooking or insulation breaking down. And with the hatch that opened inward under pressure, once smoke started, escape was nearly impossible.
To the frustration of the crew, static continually drowned communication with the control room.
But how are we going to get the moon? We can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings.
At 6:31 p.m., the test conductors were ready to start the countdown. But seconds later, horror struck. A flash fire ripped through the spacecraft.
Imagine trying to beg for help, but every word you shout out dissolves into static. Nobody hears you, nobody can respond. And then before the noise clears, a flash of fire erupts. No warning, no last words, just chaos sealed inside.
The emergency escape procedure called for a minimum of 90 seconds, but it only took about 30 seconds for the flames and toxic smoke to engulf the crew cabin. Despite heroic efforts by NASA ground crews and controllers, it took a full 5 minutes to open the hatch.
Imagine choking on fire. 30 seconds in that capsule was enough to sear their lungs shut. By 5 minutes, they weren't rescuing men. They were pulling bodies from an inferno.
The deaths of Grissom, White, and Chaffee were a shocking wake-up call that caused many to question President Kennedy's deadline to put a man on the moon. All the progress NASA had made was blinded by tragedy. The investigation of the Apollo 1 fire forced a hold on the space program. The hard lessons learned from this mission would dictate new stringent checks and balances that would inform all NASA missions to follow.
Funny how we race to conquer space, but can't even conquer our own flaws. The fire wasn't just in the capsule, it was in our own arrogance. And that's the truth. Every dream that reaches for the stars is written in blood first. Apollo 1 wasn't just a tragedy, it was the price of ambition.
ultimately changing the nation's path to the moon.